is Nana. I am the MC for today's session. Thank you for joining us on the workshop class of regional best stories on climate crisis today. This session is a part of the Journalism Conference on reporting human rights and climate crisis in Southeast Asia. This event is a partnership of the Raoul Wallenberg Institute, or the RWI, along with Indonesian Association for Media Development, or PPMN, and Internews Earth Journalism Network, or AGN. This is our second session for the day. Earlier, we had a session titled Regional Challenges on Climate Change and Human Rights Coverage, and we have learned so much from the speakers. I also hope that you will also learn a lot from this session too. So I would like to inform you that we have interpretation feature in Bahasa Indonesia for the participants. You can just check your Zoom feature here and click the globe icon. And then we have also a live stream in YouTube going on right now. You can go to YouTube and search PPMN. So now, without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our moderator for the session. Please welcome Dewi Safitri. So, Dewi Safitri, she completed study in economics and development studies from Diponegoro University in Central Java, Indonesia, for a bachelor degree, and then she pursued her master's level at the University College London, studying science, technology, and society in 2015. And she currently serves as standards and practices specialist for CNN Indonesia. Her interests includes media, science, and technology. To Mbak Dewi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Nana. Welcome. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the session. My name is Dewi, and I am both excited and privileged to moderate this workshop on regional best stories on climate crisis. On behalf of the three organizations running the project, the Raoul Wallenberg Institute, the Indonesian Association for Media Development, and the Earth Journalism Network, I will be moderating this session as part of the Journalism Conference on reporting human rights and climate crisis for media journalists in Southeast Asia. And with me today are two distinguished journalists from home and abroad, Wahyu Dhyatmika from Tempo Magazine Indonesia, and Ramesh Bhushan, the South Asia Content Coordinator for Internews Earth Journalism Network. Both Blikomang and Ramesh have both worked extensively on the issue of environment and climate change, and will share their experience and expertise of their vast works on climate crisis in Southeast Asia. Before we get to the speakers shortly, I would like to just remind you that the goal of the session are to share their experiences in regional collaboration on environment and climate change, in particular with regard to the human rights. And second, the challenge of working in collaborative efforts in the region. And then lastly, the tips and techniques of successful collaboration and impactful stories. We will get to the speakers right away. Each will get 15 minutes to 20 minutes top to present, and afterwards it's the Q&A. If you would like to pose a question, please do so through the chat box. There's a slight chance of a direct question time, if time permitting. Just use the raise your hand feature on the screen. And I will just operate on the first question, first answer basis for the Q&A. And so now we'll start with Wahyu Dhyatmika, a highly seasoned environmental journalist, probably one of the most decorated journalists in Indonesia at the moment. A long professional career in journalism since 2000, And in fact, I have 7 pages of resume of Blikomang at my hand right now. Just to give you a glimpse of his many journalistic attainments, he started the career as a reporter in East Java and is now the CEO of the Tempo Digital. He had many trainings and courses in journalism, including one from the Nieman Fellowship at the Harvard University in 2015, while his Masters of Arts degree was from the Westminster University in London in 2005. He was previously known nationally to lead the global collaborative efforts on investigative projects, such as the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers. Wahyu, I'll leave the explainer on your presentation to you, and from now on to the next 15-20 minutes, the microphone is yours.
Thank you so much, Dewi, for that very generous introduction. It is a privilege to be in the panel with Ramesh and other distinguished panelists in other sessions. I think the best way to learn the craft of journalism is by discussing stories. I believe that. So I suppose this workshop is in line with that tradition among us in this profession. So there is no number one journalist because we all have editors, and I was quite embarrassed by how Dewi introduced me. But I hope you all can learn, and of course you are also invited to share your own experience. So this session can be both enriching and inspiring for all of us here in these sessions. I'm going to share my screen and share this story on the Pangolin Reports, because I believe this particular story is a good entrance, is a good way to explain collaborative cross-border project. It was conducted back in 2018. It started in 2018 and it finished a year later in 2019. So it was a whole year project involving more than 40 reporters and editors across more than a dozen countries and newsrooms. And it was, in my understanding, it was the first Asian initiated cross-border project. And it was the beginning of what now called the Environmental Reporting Collective, or ERC. Now ERC is led by my esteemed colleague Ian Yi, based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and we has just launched another project this year on ocean and environmental issues around illegal fishing and around marine life conservation in Southeast Asia and in Asia in general. So this is the overview. I'm going to talk about the project, how did it first happen, and how it developed into a big regional collaboration. And then hopefully I can also, insert some tips of how do we, what we learn, what are the lessons learned from that experience. So this is the Pangolin Reports. It's still out there on the internet. You can just search Pangolin Reports. We have a special website dedicated for the whole reports. It consists of different angles. I will take you through the reports after this. It's quite dense reports because it's basically try to collect different angles from different spots where the pangolin first, sees and smuggle mostly into China. This is the context of the reports. We found this worrying trend since in the last maybe 10 or 15 years that all pangolins from Asia and Africa were trafficked illegally, mostly toward China, because in China it was believed that the pangolin scale have a medicinal benefit. It can cure diseases. Of course, it has no scientific background, but a lot of people still believe it, and that's fueled this illegal market for pangolins. For those of you who are not familiar with pangolins, it's the smallest mammal. It lives in the forest, mostly in Asia and Africa. And because it hunts ants, it lives on small insects. In this forest, they serve as a farmer, so to say, in those forest area. It flip the mud, the area, and it makes the area more fertile. So the loss of this particular species is really a threat to the whole ecosystem, because then the ecosystem lost one of its parts or its element that serve a very significant function in order to make the ground fertile every now and then. So it started 2018 as a project, like only 4 media involved in the beginning. It started with that particular question: how does this criminal syndicate works? What are the networks that involve in different countries in Asia and Africa, and how can it slip through so easily across the border and get to its final market in mainland China? And as you can see, the price of pangolin is also quite high, but quite vary, depends on the countries. And this is all the countries that we all come from in the network. It's from China, Hong Kong, also in Southeast Asia, or all countries in Southeast Asia mostly are involved, and also Nepal in South Asia, and Cameroon and Nigeria in Africa. So this is one of the end result that we managed to map after the investigation completed. We managed to see the network of smuggling that happened in both continents. And we have reporters on the ground interviewing people, checking and verifying facts in each of these spots. So in Indonesia, we went to the forest on Borneo, in Borneo to see the smugglers who were arrested by the cops at the time, and then from them we got this information on how they did it, what were the smuggling routes, how did they contact the other side, and so on and so forth. So we managed to then end up with this map to show the route, the smuggling route of pangolins. So I told you about why pangolin. So in the beginning, I think this is really important for a collaborative story. You need to find a story that really can connect you all, connect us all. Everyone has to have a stake in the story. Everyone has to have a similar perception, a similar understanding of how important the story is for each of the members of the project. And a good personal relation is also quite helpful if you know your partner, your media partners, your counterparts really well. That's a plus point. That's a very good point, because then in a collaborative project, you need to have the same level of trust, the same level of ethical standard. You have to have basically similar values in order to be involved in a cross-border project. You need to be assured that all of the members of that team have similar values. You follow same ethical values and so on. So that's one big reason to make sure a project can survive and deliver at the end, is that the same level of trust and values. And of course, other enabler factors should be available, good resources, funding, and good timing, momentum for the story, availability of resources, and other. So that's the enabler factors that not high on the list, but without it, it can be more difficult to deliver. So this is how it begins. This is the pangolin. It's a very small mammal with scales, but it's actually a mammal, and they roll out if they get threatened, and it's really near extinction because of the large scale trafficking happens. So we first invite experts to join to help us. We announced the project, and then we met in Hong Kong in early 2019 to get a brief from different experts, and also to map out our plan, to create a timeline and a work plan. So it begins with this big meeting where we all share our ideas, brainstorm the story, and try to imagine how the story will develop and what parts we can play in each of the countries involved. So it is also important because the meeting enables us to meet everyone involved in the beginning, but then it developed from there. The groups that you see in the picture then become larger because the story leads to countries that were not involved in the beginning. So when the story, for example, takes us to Myanmar, for instance, because we found a smuggling route to China from Myanmar, so we need to find a partner in Myanmar. The same goes to Thailand, for instance, because it's a border. It has a border with shared border with China and Myanmar. Some of the traffickers also lead us there. Some of the leads we found in Thailand, so we need to find a partner there, so on and so forth. So it developed from this small group. Then we also try to involve the public as much as we can, engage them from early on, because it's we understand it's for environmental issues mostly. One of the big challenges is try to get people's attention, right? Try to make them understand that this is important. So a lot of engagement on social media is important. And once the story published in each of our publication, we also launch it and make sure people understand and go find the story. So this is some of the findings. As you see in the earlier slides, the whole region maps. But this is the more specific maps into different countries that were featured in the story. From Africa, and this is the route in Malaysia. Our friends in Rage in Kuala Lumpur plays a very significant part to expose the trafficking routes in Malaysia. This is the places, the spots in the coast area of Sumatra in Indonesia that we found to be the preferred spot for traffickers to get their pangolin scales, or sometimes even live pangolin smuggled into Malaysia. And from Malaysia, they use land routes to get to China. In Philippines, we also found the same cases. So other than those experts, we also use data heavily in this project. We scrap a lot of SACER data from custom offices across the countries involved. So from those data, we try to map where the SACER happened, where usually custom office managed to expose the smuggle. And then from that data, we try to, identify hotspots where the most SACER happen. Usually is the best or the preferred spot for the smugglers. So a small tips when we try to do this, in order to, because the goal in this project is try to create a map to enable us to see the traffickers' network and route. So we use people tracing techniques a lot. We do that by trying to find initial whistleblowers or someone who can give us initial lead, and using that person or information as an opening, and then snowballing from there. And we can also use social media also to get initial tips. Some smugglers try to sell their services on the dark web, on social media, and then we map the network in each of the spots that we found. So at the end, we try to also get real stories out of each step. So it's not end up only as a map or a network, but also get human stories, like face-to-face story from the each parts in the networks. And the human right aspect of this story, I think, is really relevant, because a lot of the people who get on the bottom end as a victim of this trafficking practice is the indigenous people. They are the one who suffer by losing this species in the ecosystem. And also they often get blamed. Sometimes they hunt the pangolin for their own needs, for their own use, but sometimes the public or even the law enforcement usually use them as a scapegoat to blame if these things happen. So I think I almost run out of time. Let me just go to the last slide. This is just the networks that we found. We use also data and documents tracing tips in the project a lot. So as I said, we scrap a lot of SACER data and use that as a data sets to strengthen the story. And then we also use money trail techniques to see the financial network behind traffickers. So this is my last slide. What are the lessons learned? When you start a cross-border collaborative project, you never know how where it leads you. So you need to be open-minded about who the partners need to be involved. In this particular project, we decided early on that it can evolve. So it's quite flexible about partners involved, but it still needs a core team. The core team is the one that hold things together, that make sure the projects run on time, because it's really easy to get carried away with different projects, and you have, of course, different responsibility in your respective newsroom. So you need to have a very strong core team to make sure everybody deliver on schedule. on the tools, we use Google Docs to share stories, documents, Slack and Zoom for communication, so nothing fancy. We use what we can. And I think the most important thing is the trust that we have on each other. And that really carry the story until the end. I guess that's all for now, Mbak Dewi. I hope that it can give all of you some idea of how the story were developed, and I'm happy to answer any questions during the Q&A.
Thank you, Bli Komang. That was very interesting, but I also see it looks like a lot of work, complicated, a lot of work. And everyone, I would now invite you to enter the conversation. Anyone wanting to pose a question to Bli Komang, he's here to answer your question. Just post your question on the chat room, or use the raise your hand feature if available. Oh, not yet. So yeah, put it on the chat room. But for now, Bli, I have several questions. To me, looking at your presentation, I cannot help but wonder if I am a newbie in the collaborative transborder reporting. My position, I work and live in Jakarta, and I want to do a collaborative effort. What would you say in terms of scale and complexity? What I mean by scale is, should I go easy first with, probably just one or two neighboring countries, journalists in the neighboring countries, Malaysia, for example, or Thailand, several of the closest in proximity, just to get it a little bit simpler in terms of working and assignment. And then when it comes to complexity, when you decided upon having the Pangolin as your center point for the collaborative reporting, how did you decide on how deep and how complex you want to go with the issue? Do you have a clear idea from the get-go that what you want is investigating the illegal trade behind the pangolin, or whatever comes, you will do whatever comes with the investigation? I guess that's two questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mbak Dewi. For the first one, I think as in any project or any undertaking, I think it's best to start with the most simple ones. So things that you can always develop from there. You can always enlarge or evolve the project once you have a very core committed teams or partners in the network. So if you want to start something cross-border and you have potential partners that you can trust in one or two countries, go for it. I think it's best to start small, as long as you can find an issue that equally important, equally significant for all the partners involved, because that's really important. You don't want to end up only you think the story is important and the others just drag into it. So but I think I found that rarely happen, because once you have this strong committed group, sometimes you even think the same way. You think the same, you have the same perception, the same values on issues and what really move people, you feel passionate about. On your second question, I think in the Pangolin Story project, we use the 3 days that we have in Hong Kong in the beginning of the project to decide on those things that you mentioned. How deep should we go? What are the main angles? How can we find an angle a storyline that can involve everyone, because we don't want a story that only focus on the conservation, for instance, because that will give an imbalanced portion to the countries that have pangolins, like Indonesia and Malaysia, but not countries who are used as a trading route only, like Myanmar or Thailand, or countries that becomes the market only, like in China. So by deciding what are the story for us, what are the main story for each of us, and then we floor it. Some of us who are editors can see the link and the thread that can connect all the story together. So that's how we did it. We just invite everyone to give their ideas and outline, and then from there we try to find things that can really connect the group and the story into a big story that feels important for all of us.
This gets really interesting, and you don't get to see that many collaborative efforts when it comes to journalism across Southeast Asia. Maybe I'm just not seeing enough, or it's my own limited journalistic vocabulary to scan for any of this. But I come from an organization myself. I'm the current sitting Secretary General of the Society of Indonesian Science Journalists. And when it comes to collaborative efforts, we always thought that it's going to be difficult, it's going to be hard, it is going to cost a lot of money. The coordinative efforts alone will take a lot of time and space and whatnot. And I think what you said about finding the trusted partner is one of the keys. But how do you find your trusted partner? When it comes to Pangolin Report, it involves so many people, so many newsrooms. How do you vet for which of the trusted partner, and how do you communicate so they will join you on board rather than this is not my story, I want to do it alone, etc.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think for all of us, the Panama Papers was the really eye openers in terms of making us understand the impact we can create if we work together. So I think that's the first revelation, and we have to thank our colleague at ACIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, to bring the project to life and really taught us that important lesson. I think from that project, from Panama Papers, we realized it is possible to work together. We are not lone wolf, so to say. Usually investigative reporters are lone wolf. They work alone. They don't share anything, and then suddenly they get this big scoop, and everyone, are surprised. But I think we can create better impact. We can connect to larger audience if we work together, because each of the media has different segments and different audience, especially for environmental stories, because environmental stories cannot stand alone in one spot, in one country, because usually it involves supply chain, it involves different players. Even if not, we can learn from each other's experience in dealing with this particular case, because most of the stories are similar. We have problems with pollution, we have problems with fossil fuels, we have problems with plastic, deforestation, etc. So if we can just get the story together, we can give the public a better insight and a better perspective. So again, the question then is, how do you find the right partners, the trusted partners? For the Pangolin project, we rely on the networks that evolved from the Uncovering Asia conferences that was organized by GIGN, the Global Investigative Journalist Network. They have this annual conference that invite almost every journalist in Asia. And the first idea of Pangolin come from the Uncovering Asia conference in South Korea. On the sideline of that conference, we met with Professor Ying from Hong Kong, from Malaysia Kini, our friend from Malaysia Kini, our friend from Rappler, our friend from The Reporter in Taiwan, and that's the beginning. And that's in Myanmar, and I fed some of the media that later on involved. So personal networks then help, as long as you have these core groups that help in the beginning.
Okay, thank you, Bli Komang, indeed for the lengthy explainer. Everyone, just a reminder that Bli Komang is still available for any questions, in particular about the issue of collaborative efforts, collaborating journalistic works in the region in Southeast Asia. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them on the chat room. We'll have until 11:30 to finish the session. Next, I will go to our next presenter, Bli Komang. That will do for now. Thank you very much. Please stay at your place if there's more question next. I would also just remind you that we are now sitting at a workshop on regional best stories on climate crisis. While Bli Komang has explained at length about the side of the collaborative efforts in Southeast Asia, next we have Ramesh Bhushan. He is the South Asia Content Coordinator at Internews Earth Journalism Network. He currently manages the Internews Earth Journalism Network, www.earthjournalism.net, if you want to have a look at his work and the network of the EJN and the whole journalism activity in South Asia. He also works as the Nepal editor for the multilingual site, the thirdpole.net in South and Central Asia. Ramesh has had a colorful journalistic career, from radio producer, radio host, to environment correspondent and science reporter, as well as editor. But I was so pleased to learn that both Ramesh and I actually have one thing in common, and that is that we both, at one point of our life, worked for the BBC language service. Ramesh worked for the Nepali service, and I, of course, worked for the Indonesian service. So yeah, high five, man. He also traveled extensively for various environment and climate change fellowships. But while his CV is modestly 3 pages only, unlike Bli Komang who's 7, he actually has not 1 but 2 master's degrees. I mean, how awesome is that? One is in environment science and the other in anthropology. So Ramesh Bhushan, I'll leave the explainer or your presentation to you for the next several minutes. The microphone is yours.
Well, thank you, Dewi. It was nice to hear Wahyu about this collaborative journalism that we often do and prioritize in Earth Journalism Network. I have been, fortunately, I do have 2 kind of things I do. I help journalists to build capacity to do better reporting, and use my strength and capacity to help them wherever possible. We call them mentoring. And secondly, I also do stories for the Third Pole, which is one of the key partners of Earth Journalism Network in South Asia. And we do have the content coordinators, the coordinators in different regions. So we exchange this information and stories, in different regions too. So today I'll be talking more about one initiative we have been doing, where I have been working, constantly for over a decade. So I'll share my slide. Can you see my slide?
Yeah, perfectly.
Thank you. So I'm talking about reporting rivers and rights of people and the planet in South and Southeast Asia. So we are talking a lot about our right on this planet, but have we given some space to the rights of other species or rivers, for example, or the other entities that are helping us to live on this planet? So we're talking a lot about ourselves, but when we talk about ourselves, are we not talking adequately about those resources that we are extracting or exploiting, right? So I'll be talking more about rivers because rivers link people, rivers link societies, and rivers link countries. So I'll be talking specifically about few rivers that originate in South and Southeast Asia and shape our lives. So this is what we call third pole. Basically, how this third pole came in, this initiative came in was like the Earth Journalism Network and China Dialogue, that's bilingual site. They wanted to discuss or bring the stories or the issues around water and the rivers in South Asia and Southeast Asia. So we tried to start a kind of initiative where we don't have the country boundaries, and our geographical coverage is basically the boundaries of the river that originate in the Himalayas, extending from Afghanistan to Myanmar, covering around 3,500 kilometers of the tallest mountain in the world, including the Mount Everest and the Tibetan Plateau. So this is the third largest ice mass on the planet after North and South Pole. These mountains are the source of 10 largest rivers in Asia, including the Mekong in Southeast Asia, Yellow, Yangtze, Irrawaddy, Ganges, Brahmaputra, Indus. So, this is like a kind of a, network of the rivers. It is the headquarter of the rivers in Asia. Then we just, removed the national boundaries because national boundaries are so contested. They are so disputable. That's why we created a map of the river basins that originate from the Himalayas. So if you see on the left, you can see Amudarya, Tarim on the Central Asia, and then move towards east. You come to Pakistan with Indus and India, all the Ganges in Nepal, India, Brahmaputra on the left and on the right in Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh, India. If you move towards east, you can see Irrawaddy, Salween, and Mekong. And if you go up to north, you can see Yellow and Yangtze. So this picture, it is such a different picture, right? We are so used to use the national boundaries. But if we start removing the national boundaries, we figure out how networked we are. If we take the example of rivers, that's where the region looks like. If we remove the national boundaries and try to understand how rivers shape our livelihood, and they have been such a resource for the humans because we have exploited, we have used the resources, the rivers too much. If you see the global data, about 60% of the rivers globally have been dammed for different reasons, and only for the consumption of the humans. Just one species that is available, or I mean, that is just one species, among millions on this planet, right? So we are exploiting rivers a lot. But rivers, reporting rivers means a lot because you can understand several aspects of life and the ecosystems that is supported by the rivers. So the third pole is something we call alternative media, because we have a lot of mainstream media, but we try to start up a kind of a very niche kind of a initiative that has a focus on river and water crisis, because water is going to be one of the most pressing issues due to climate change. It is already, but it is going to be a larger issue due to climate change. And also, we bring in the journalists from different regions, commission the stories, edit them, and publish in multiple languages. And these stories are republished by several outlets, mainstream outlet in the region. We do a lot of collaborative pieces because, oftentimes as a journalist, we are so bound with nationalism. Like, even something is wrong, you don't dare to say this is our government's fault when it comes to nation. So we are much more bounded around our thoughts, our beliefs, our culture, and our nationality, or what you call the nation comes first, for example, right? So this kind of things don't allow you to go beyond your country and criticize the things that your country is shaping around. So when you do a collaborative pieces in between countries, if journalists come up with the idea and then do a kind of collaborative piece, then you can give a whole picture of the problem, and then try to tell the realities and inform people, or better inform people to make better decisions. Not only people, but policymakers, including policymakers. So we do a lot of collaborative pieces, in the third pole, and also we have a site called Mekong. We have Equatorial in Indonesia. We have content coordinator in the Philippines. So we exchange our idea and the story, and then try to tell what connects us when it comes to environment, right? And we decided to do deep dive into water issues, and put our geographic coverage as the river basin. So when it comes to reporting water and climate change, we focus on the river, but river is all about water and climate change, and also it is all about agriculture. It is about food. It is about energy, because a lot of the rivers have been used to generate electricity, through hydropowers. So the climate change is impacting water significantly. It has already, both in availability of water and the pattern of rainfall is changing, which means our life will depend on our rivers, and this is going to be impacted a lot. So how do we tell the stories? How do we tell the stories beyond development? Like we say, we need to develop. Yes, it is. But how do we tell how we need to develop? How we can be environment friendly? How do you understand all the dynamics of energy, food, and water? And if you just go, we are talking about human rights and climate change here. So if the water availability is impacted, it is going to affect the individual's access to clean water, which is purely a human rights, for example. It is going to affect the right of every individual to get food to eat, because the rainfall is changing, the pattern is changing. If we are not telling the stories in a better way, we are missing that part as well. So, reporting climate change is not just about the climate patterns or the warming temperature. It is all about how it will affect economy, how the poor and marginalized people will be affected, and how other ecosystems will not work well if this happens, right? So water is a very precious thing. just 3% of water on this planet is fresh water. All the humans, all the, we are fighting for 3% of water. And if this 3% of water is in peril due to climate change, it is really going to create conflict. It has already created conflict. The countries are fighting for the rivers, the countries are fighting for water resources, and it is going to increase in the future. How do we tell the stories of this conflict and also link with how people will in fact impacted? That is where we have been working a lot on reporting. Stressed planet will have insufficient water, it is sure. Not in volume. The volume may be okay, but the timing of the availability will be changing. So that will create a lot of stress, and it will be determining the future of almost all of us. So, but there is something called common but differentiated impact. The rich people may be impacted less, and the poor will be more. The marginalized people will be impacted more, or the indigenous people will be impacted more. So, there will be stress, definitely yes, but the level of stress is different. That's why that is a common problem, but there will be differentiated impacts. So how do we tell the story of differentiated impacts so that we'll be getting, like, we will be doing more, we'll be creating, better policies to address those issues. I was talking about this 2 billion people's life that is being supported by about 10 largest river in Asia that originate in the Himalayas and save the lives of people in South and Southeast Asia. So 2 billion is almost 1/4 of the whole humanity. And the best and meaningful stories of climate change comes around water and the rivers, because they are saving our life. And we need to tell the stories in a more profound way. Rivers are lifelines, but rivers are becoming lifeless. So lifeless rivers are not worthy, right? So how do we make lifeful rivers and make our life resourceful, right? How do we talk about economy and ecology? How do we talk about this, balancing ecology and economy? Because the world is so dominated with all this economic perspective. But if we fail to understand how the nature works or tell the stories of environment, we are not going to be happy, right? And it is so polluted. Our rivers are so polluted, our water bodies are so polluted, and it is too politicized. So how do we reduce this, both the politics and the pollution in the river? We need more stories to tell. We are not giving enough space to these water bodies that support our life. That is where we do a lot of stories. I focus on that. And also, large population is dependent on the rivers or the fresh water. So if we don't tell the stories in a better way, we are missing a lot. We are not telling people good information. We are not giving good information, and that is not helping people to make better decisions. And that will leave us into a trouble, right? So how we need to think about this. And I think as journalists, we need to think more seriously, do more collaborative pieces, and understand the whole dynamics of the environmental issues in the context of climate change. I did few longer stories. In 2018, I traveled all the way from Tibet to India, walked for 3 weeks, rafted for 10 days. So 1.5 months, from Tibet to India, in the remotest part of the world, in Tibet, in Nepal, and went to India along the longest river called the Karnali, and did a series of stories to understand how this river has been impacted, how the life has been impacted, and how the politics is working around in between India, China, and Nepal. In 2016, I traveled in a river called Kosi in the eastern Nepal, from Tibet to India, to do to do a series of stories to figure out how things are moving, how the life have been impacted, how the geology have been impacted. So this kind of things. In 2019, we did a kind of a video story in the shadow of Everest, Mount Everest, where people were shifting from village to downstream because there was no water. So we say, like, we have too much of water in Nepal, but we do have too less of water, because for 4 months we have too much of water because of monsoon, and for the 8 months we don't have enough water. So how are we balancing it? How do we understand this? So to understand that, I traveled in different part of the of the Himalayas to report back and tell the stories. And we do a lot of stories. We commission the stories to people across the Himalayas, Southeast Asia and South Asia, and publish. So we focus on something called water in larger perspective, but also we do a small stories, very in-depth stories around the life supported by the rivers, the ecosystem supported by the rivers or the water systems. This is what we do in South and Southeast Asia. So if you have any questions, please let me know. But I want to stress that we need to think about the larger ecosystem rather than humans only. Otherwise, we'll be missing a lot of stories that needs to be told to people to make better decisions. If you want to reach out to me in Twitter, there is Ramesh Bhushan. If you want to reach out in email, there's my email. Thank you very much for your time. And I would like to thank you for considering me for the presentation. Dewi.
Thanks, Ramesh. That's a lot of rivers and waters from Ramesh, and which is interesting because I've never thought of rivers and waters that way when it comes to climate change. The intersectionality is simply vast. It's a connection to climate change, it's connection to conflict, it's connection to environment and pollution, its connection to problem of access of clean water, to biodiversity along the rivers and the rivers basin, to food security, to energy, to poverty, to politics of waters and rivers. So many issues all blend together by the rivers and waters. I have several other questions, but first, from the participant, we have RT Fadila Putri, not mentioning the media she comes from. I want to ask about the Chinese dam project that is destroying the Mekong River ecosystem. Is the third pole also campaigning for the impact caused by the construction of this Chinese dam that will damage the Mekong River ecosystem? And secondly, how to form people power that is concerned with water security issues, especially know that especially know that we are actually facing a clean water crisis. So that's the question, Ramesh.
Oh, thank you. Definitely China is in the headwaters because the headwater of all the rivers are in China. If you talk about Mekong or even Irrawaddy or I know the Ganges or Brahmaputra, so the largest rivers originate from the Tibet, the plateau, on the north of the Himalayas. So there's a large, projects going on, but it is not only China that is building dams, but it is a huge economy, but they have been building the hydropowers in their region, and also they have been supporting or constructing hydropowers in other countries in South and Southeast Asia. So it is really a big issue in the region, and we need to talk about how do we balance between electricity and ecology. We need electricity, definitely, yes, but how much? How much we exploit the rivers? Because the rivers are a very sensitive ecosystems. And if we are so greedy and if we don't really think about the whole ecosystems, it is not going to help in the future. We are expecting more extreme events. So if we're investing billions of dollars in hydropowers and our climate system is unstable, we don't know what will happen. The uncertainty is increasing, which means our investments are in peril. So how do we tell these stories? How do we, balance this ecology and electricity is a very challenging question. And there is no level of cooperation in between countries because there is a huge economic interest, and that drives a lot. That drives very much. People don't listen about all the things. But ultimately, what we have to think about is if we don't treat our rivers well, they are going to treat the same way. We have seen it, the large floods, the landslides in the region. So the way we treat the rivers, they will reverse. They will treat the same way back. So it is important story. We are not telling this story in a better way because we are very much, what do you call it? We are very national, but I mean, we are bounded with these national boundaries and we don't go beyond it. We need to talk about it. We need to talk about the real things and we need to come together. People are not agreeing to talk to each other because these are driven by the economic interest. So how do we bring them? And then I think if governments don't talk to each other, the civil society can talk a bit and journalists can talk more because we have said that we are the ones who will go beyond national boundaries. We'll tell the truth. And by networking, like the collective reporting or the third pole or the Mekong Eye, we can come together and then tell these stories in more profound way. For example, a Chinese journalist, a Vietnamese journalist, a South Asian journalist, or Nepali or Indonesian. I mean, and we can come together and tell the realities so that government understand and the people who are in downstream and upstream understand about the problem. I think that is the way we can deal with this problem. Otherwise, there is no way we can move ahead.
All right, thank you. Arti, I hope that answered your questions. She actually commented, I agree how we deal with economic interest and ecological interest go hand in hand. Okay, Ramesh, I noticed a little bit about what you say about best and needful stories around climate change comes from and around water and rivers. But most of the time, when it comes to rivers and waters, I'm not speaking about the region. I'm speaking about when it comes to Indonesia, the most covered issues on rivers and waters are its pollution. So cover one of the many intersectionalities that you have mentioned about the issues around waters and rivers. So how do you push for other issues aside from pollution? It's almost like the only problem with rivers and waters in Indonesia is its pollution side, but the others are non-existent. So how do you push for that?
Yeah, because it is easy to see pollution. You can see just in front of yourself. So you see that one as a bigger problem. It is a big problem because our rivers are becoming lifeless and they are very sensitive ecosystems. And we are not treating them well. So pollution is something people have been talking about a lot. And second issue that we are talking a lot about is the floods, for example, or the disasters that we call the human-made disasters. So these two things are quite seasonal and easy to know or easy to see, but we are not going in depth to understand why this is happening, right? So all the side stories that we are talking about are the many stories. We are not doing better seaways. That's the reason for our filthy rivers. So how do we manage our sewer system is more important to talk about rather than the pollution in the river. This is a part of it, right? And then the whole encroachment of the rivers is something we have not been talking about because the river has its own territory, and if we start encroaching them, they will come back because whole watershed, we have to look at the watershed. So the amount of water that falls into watershed is definitely going to come, and is sometimes less, sometimes more. So we are trying to invade or encroach the territories of river, and when it comes its way, we say that it is flawed, it is creating problem. But some way, I think we need to think about the side stories and mini stories. How do we manage them is something. How do we manage our houses? How do we manage our waste? How do we think about rivers? And how do we not encroach every piece of land available on this planet, right? So we need to get back. I mean, to little bit rethink about how we think about shaping. And also, we are very arrogant species because we think that we are the wise species. We are intelligent. We have like thousands of engineers around the world. We can build dams. We can build what do you call bridges. So we have some kind of arrogancy and telling that, look, we are the humans, we can just do whatever we want and we can make ourselves safer. But it is not going to work. It hasn't worked well in the past few years. It is not going to work in the future because we are really, really into it. We are really in crossing the river. So I think we need to think about, I mean, we don't have to think about, I mean, we say like rivers are just the channels that flowing around us. It is not. It is not actually. It is all about mountains. It is all about the hills. It is about the riverbanks. It is about the erosion. It is about sewage. So our whole system is built upon around the rivers and the oceans, right? So how do we link up that one is very important. And I think as journalists, we need to go beyond this, issues that we have been covering much and bring those side stories into the main stories.
Fine. Ramesh, thank you for that. And that is for our Ramesh presentation. I will now re-invite Bli Komang or Dhyatmika to the Q&A session again. So everyone, you're welcome to pose any question to both of our speakers. Bli Komang has emphasized his presentation along the importance of doing collaborative efforts when it comes to journalistic efforts, highlighting the climate change, climate crisis, and its impact, while Ramesh has stressed a lot of his presentation on the importance of rivers and waters and how it brings to life a lot of intersectionality issues with people in different countries and different borders. I will now start with Bli Komang. You've had several collaborative projects with many journalists across Asia and probably across the world as well. So what are the challenges to do that? Were there any moments in the project that you thought that, Dan, why is this so difficult? How do you get out of this, etc.?
Yeah, thank you, Dewi, for the question. I think the difficulties really lies on the managing the project itself, because there's two types of collaborative project. The one that initiated by an association or a group that really focus on managing this cross-border project, like ICIJ for the Panama Papers, and the last one is the Pandora Papers that was just released a few months ago. And we have other groups like that, OCCRP, for instance, also quite intensive in initiating and managing this project. Usually the management side of that kind of project is not really challenging because they have a dedicated person for that. But the second type of collaborative that involves different newsrooms, without a core teams, usually it's more challenging because we start with equal say or equal share of responsibility in the project, and sometimes it's really people quite reluctant to take lead in this kind of project, and that could lead up to time deadline not met, deliveries or assignments not being done on time or not executed properly, and so on and so forth. So from my experience, the managing of the project is one challenge that usually happen despite of the trust and the similar understanding or perception on the issue. Sometimes the small things, that could be a stumbling block, so to say, in that kind of collaborative project.
Right. Ramesh, a lot of people who attended today represent different newsroom, and within the newsroom, there's only the specific spaces for issues when it comes to climate change or environment or climate crisis. So when it comes to specific particular issues such as water and rivers, how do you convince the editors? If I am the reporter, the correspondent, how do you convince my editors that we need this story more than, I don't know, the story on the gig economy or the stories on another corruption? That this is not just a story on rivers, but that our audience really needs the story.
That's a pretty tough thing to do as a reporter. Oftentimes we think that environmental stories are the fillers, like when you don't have a political story or economic story, and then you just say, hey, do you have one story that can go to the first page, and then you do a kind of a 500-word piece for the first page, and you are happy because your stories rarely come as the main stories. But I think in the recent years, the newsrooms I have been working with and collaborating, there is a kind of a sense of increasing understanding of the environmental crisis that we are going to. It is not just about the climate change, but I think the good part of climate change is that we knew a bit early that the planet is not going in the right direction. So this is the good part of the climate change. All right, people have started thinking about, are we doing something wrong? And then a lot of editors now started to say to me, like, can you come to the newsroom and then give a kind of a presentation saying why this is important? And then they have started to come up saying, look, can I republish this story? Or can you help me help our reporter to get more inside of this problem? So I think the whole way is to de-link climate change, because we have said the earth is warming, it is too much, we have been saying a lot. Now we need to tell what happens if earth warms, and what happens to frogs, for example, what happens to tigers, what happens to plants. So now we have to go into the specifics now, and these stories will come very interesting, right? If you start saying talking about the frogs and the climate change, then people will be saying, oh, really? So let's reduce the whole global and this earth is warming news into specific news and make it interesting, right? And there are a lot of research being done. We need to just dig out a few things and talk to the science people, and keep our relation with them, and engage ourselves a lot. We don't have to do it much, right? And then that will certainly help you to get space. But I think there are two things are happening. One is the science is emerging, science is advancing. That's why we have more stories from science, and the newsrooms are getting more into environmental problems, because the editor also knows that there's a flood. The editor has also started to know that the earth is in crisis. Now, both way, I think we are a bit more privileged now to get more space, but we have to push it. There is no way beyond, right? So I think that is the only way we can deal with it.
Yeah, can I jump in there, Dewi?
Sure.
Yeah, I agree with Ramesh.
This is speaking from the.
Yeah, I think.
I was just about to add a comment that this is speaking from your point of view as the editor.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
I agree with Ramesh. I think climate change, climate crisis story is the most important story nowadays. And I think we need to look at every story from the environmental point of view. Political story, business stories, city story can also have environmental angle. And so it's not just limited to environmental stories, because if we start to introduce that perspective to the newsroom, all story can be related to climate crisis. We talk about pollution, air pollution. It can be a city story. We talk about the same topic, air pollution, link it to energy. It can be a business story. So my point is, to make it more interesting and to make it more convincing to the editors, you need to relate it to a stake that can be relatable to the larger audience, and it can be anything. It can be a business, it can be politics, it can be lifestyle. So it doesn't need to be just about the environment, because it's streamlining it into our everyday reporting is the challenge, and I think that needs to be done, because as Mbak Dewi imply in the question, it's still very difficult to convince editors to see the importance of the story. But if you widen the angle and relate it to everyday's life and localize it, give it a human face, then it's more, I think it's more difficult to refuse that kind of story.
Okay, so climate change, but make it local. Yeah, and make it irrelevant. Thank you, Blikomang. Thank you, Ramesh. We have another question. Oh, but just before that, ladies and gentlemen, everyone, the session is the workshop on regional best stories on climate crisis. What we want to is give you a highlight of how collaborative efforts can be done when it comes to highlighting the problem of climate change, climate crisis, and the human rights and its other intersectionalities, and also the tips and technique of successful collaborative efforts and making stories with impact. We have less than 15 minutes now, but please do keep your question coming. One is already here. It's from Rizka. Rizlia. My name is Rizka. My question is, as a journalist, how do we deal with controversial environmental issues and how to make a qualified report? Since some of the issues has relation with certain people's interests, sometimes it leads to an enormous risk. And by enormous risk, she meant by the security of the reporters. So it's involved a lot of interest of a lot of parties, and that just may harm the reporters himself or herself. Blikomang, would you like to start on this, and then I'll go to Ramesh?
Yes, it is quite dangerous sometimes if you plan to investigate an environmental story that has connection to maybe corporations or group of people who commit illegal logging or environmental committed crime in environmental aspect of their business or operation. You can cross their interest in running those illegal businesses. I think how to minimize that risk, in my opinion, it's always goes back to good, basic good quality journalism, good quality reporting. If you done your homework, verify each evidence, confirming stories to relevant parties, and especially give the accused a space to also give their side of the story. I think usually that basic steps help you minimize the risk, because you have all the evidence, and you also don't try to just give one side of the story, but also be open for the accused version of what happened. But if that still lead you to some problems or some legal risk, I'm coming back to my point about doing it together as a collaborative project. Usually that not only optimize the impact, but can also minimize the risk, because if it become a large project where not only one newsroom publishes the story, then usually it looks stronger, and it can be a deterrent for anyone who try to harm the reporters or try to challenge the accuracy of the reports.
Right, stronger together. That's one of the key points. Yeah. Okay, Ramesh, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I think journalism is a risky business already, so we know that, and we decided to be a journalist because it is risky. We knew it, from the day one that we want to be a journalist. But I think protecting ourselves is very important, because it is going to be more riskier, because more extraction of resources, a lot of illegal things are happening. So and we have seen a lot of journalists being killed in different parts of the world, because all this natural resources politics is is escalating, right? It is really moving up. So it is very important to understand how we make ourselves safe, and we need to. I think one way to avoid or reduce the risk is collaborate with others, and also collaborate with the lawyers, for example, collaborate with the experts, scientists, activists. So don't just keep yourself as kind of within yourself, but try to make a cohort where if something happens to you, there is a group or the society that will talk for you or help you wherever needed, right? So that is one way to make sure that you are linked up with all these global regional networks that value and act as a civil society, and that they will come to help you when they need it. The second is try to reduce the individual threat, the physical threat, by taking some safety journalism trainings, or digital safety journalism trainings, and make yourself safe. That will help you to reduce the risk. And the third is also talk with the editorial team and the editor beforehand about the story that you are going to do and the associated risk. That's and then if something happens to you, there is your editor to take care of you, somewhere needed, right? So I think we need to be cautious. We need to understand the dynamics, but we have to. And also, the fourth thing is we have to be correct. We should be reporting correctly, so that we don't fall in the trap. If we manage this one, I think we'll reduce the risk. But we should bear in mind that journalism is a risky business, and it is going to be more riskier in the future.
Right. Very strong message, Ramesh. Thank you very much indeed. So we have less than 7 minutes, and I want to use this last several minutes to ask you both, Blikomang and Ramesh, the question that I've always had with regard to those who had or lead the newsroom. To some extent, both of you are head of the newsroom, and I wonder, how do you see the coverage of climate change, climate crisis, and the intersectionalities to both issues when it reported at the media, the mainstream media at least, both in the region and in Indonesia? Blikomang, would you start with how it's being reported in Indonesia?
Yeah, I think in the last few years we've seen a growing space, a growing portion of climate crisis reporting in our national media. I think the newsroom awareness of its importance has grown in a positive sense, and I think the resources available for those kind of reporting also help moving the media landscape into that direction, because now there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of collaborative offer, on regional and global scale that can, really make it possible for this kind of reporting. So maybe a few years ago, if there is a reporter with this idea of reporting climate crisis, maybe they don't have any support from within the newsroom, but now it is becoming possible because of the various resources available. So I think first the awareness have certainly increased, and second, the resources available also help make it happen, and hence the growth in the scale and size of reporting on environmental issues. But I have to say that not all of the coverage have the right perspective. Sometimes you still see reports that put environmental issues in conflict with economic issues, development, human needs, and etc. While what we need is, a more holistic view that without environment, all others will be lost. So this is not something that you need to choose. This is something paramount. That kind of perspective, I still think needs to brainstorm and discuss within newsroom, so we all have the same perspective in seeing this issue.
Right. Very important point for the PPMN and Earth Journalism Network and the Royal Wallenberg Institute that your work is far from done. Okay, Ramesh, go to you. With regards to the perspective of the media in the region, how the climate change and climate crisis has been covered so far.
I think, and I agree with Wahyu about increasing, space for in media. But there are two reasons for it, because there are so many online platforms that are available now, and you don't have to worry about space when you talk about stories online. So that is a kind of benefit now. But newspapers are still struggling to balance this one. But I think with the online platforms, it has liberated all this newsroom space kind of thing a lot. But the more important question is how capable journalists are to understand conditions. Are we helping to build capacity? Are we helping ourselves to build capacity? Because we need different angles. We need to understand whole complex science. We need to understand the dynamics. We need to understand the ecosystems, ecology. So there is, I think the demand side is increasing, but the supply side is not increasing in a way it should, right? So how do we nurture our reporters to bring in better stories? How do we help them to build their capacities? How do we tell them or help them to understand how to work with data? How to understand, how to tell them, how to tell the probabilities or all these uncertainties that science has within the research, right? So we are not, investing resources to help build capacity of journalists. I think we need to fill in that gap. We are trying to do a bit, I know, as a niche media or a supporting agency like the Earth Journalism Network. We do a lot of trainings and kind of thing. But within the newsroom, I think there is a very negligible amount of resources available for individuals' capacity building. If we don't do it, we'll not be able to get the real stories, better stories, the impactful stories. I think we need to also understand that and help to bridge that gap, and also try to bring in more enthusiastic and capable environment reporters into the newsroom to make it more impactful, and also to do better reportings. I think that is also we need to think about.
Very well said and fantastic, Ramesh. Thank you very much. Indeed, thank you, Bli Komang, and also the participants, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the message from the chat room. Don't forget to fill the feedback form by clicking the available link if you want to get an A certificate, but your feedback is valuable for the betterment of this similar project in the future. Thank you for both esteemed speakers, Ramesh Bhushan, Wahyu Dhyatmika. So very pleased to have this opportunity to moderate the session and also to learn from both of you. Thank you everyone attending for your question and for your attention. For everyone making the time to participate. Last but not least, to PPMN, Raoul Wallenberg Institute, and the Earth Journalism Network. So that's for this workshop today. Hopeful to see you again at some other point to campaign for better coverage of climate change and climate crisis. My name is Dewi, Safitri. Thank you again for having me today. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank
Mbak
you.
Nana, over to you.
Okay, yes, thank you to Dewi, Safitri, Ramesh Bhushan, and Wahyu Dhyatmika for such an insightful session. And thank you all for the participants who have joined from wherever you are in this world. But before we end our session, let's take a quick picture first. You can turn on your camera if you want, and I'll have my colleague from PPMN to take the picture. Mbak Lina, can you please take the picture?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. One. Open camera. Okay.
This is one of those Indonesia's kearifan lokal.
Yes, this is our local wisdom. Okay, then again, for the participants in the chat box, please find the feedback form. We highly appreciate it if you can fill it, and you can give a confirmation if you would like us to issue an e-certificate for you. And don't forget that we still have more sessions for tomorrow. So if you want to join them, please register from the link in the chat box. So see you again. Goodbye and see you tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Bye.
Bye.
For human rights to be achieved, all parties must be engaged, aware,